2007 might not feel like long enough ago to recap on what is nominally a history channel, but as you'll see, 2007 was, in fact, an entirely different world. A world that was, in many ways, the surreal prequel to the world of today. So many world-changing stories that you might just recognize. Let's get started with January. Any great prequel, like movie classic Dumb and Dumberer When Harry Met Lloyd, needs a big opening scene. So, if 2007 were a movie, imagine this. An empty stage in San Francisco. A hushed, expectant audience. A man walks on wearing white trainers, jeans, and a black turtleneck. The crowd cheers. "Thank you for coming," he says. "We're gonna make some history here today." It's the 9th of January. And Steve Jobs is about to announce the first iPhone. Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer famously laughed at it, saying, $500? Fully subsidized? With a plan? That is the most expensive phone in the world. And it doesn't appeal to business customers, because it doesn't have a keyboard. It turns out people didn't actually want a keyboard. They wanted to play Angry Birds on the toilet. And it all started here. The iPhone killed the flip phone, at least for a while, wounded the camera industry, and doomed us all to scrolling through social media at 2 AM. Speaking of, don't forget to like and subscribe, and, as the kids say, absolutely obliterate that bell icon. Anyhow, staying in America, the 4th of January saw a glass ceiling get well and truly smashed when Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House. It was a landmark moment for American politics, placing a woman second in the line of presidential succession. Over in Europe, the club got bigger. On the 1st of January, Bulgaria and Romania officially joined the European Union, bringing the total number of member states to 27. It was a moment of optimism for a united Europe, something, much like the flip phone, that wouldn't fare so well in years to come. On the same day, South Korean diplomat Ban Ki-moon came to town, when he was appointed UN Secretary General. A few weeks earlier, he had made a valiant bid to counter his perceived dull persona with a speech at the UN Correspondents Association dinner. I think you'll agree he absolutely smashed it.
Checking a list, checking it twice, going to find out who's gonna naughty or nice.
Now let's head to Boston on the 31st. The city was thrown into a full-blown panic when police discovered mysterious electronic devices with exposed wires attached to bridges and road signs. Highways were closed, bomb squads were deployed, and the media went into a frenzy. The devices turned out to be light-bright signs featuring a character from the cartoon Aqua Teen Hunger Force. It was a guerrilla marketing campaign for a late-night cartoon. The same signs had been put up in 9 other cities, including New York and LA, where nobody cared. But in Boston, it was treated as an act of war. When the 2 artists responsible, Peter Berdovsky and Sean Stevens, were arrested and dragged in front of the media, they refused to answer any questions about the quote-unquote bombs. Instead, they held a press conference where they would steadfastly only discuss hairstyles of the 1970s, responding to any other queries with a simple, "That is not a hair question." The fallout from the marketing stunt was expensive. Turner Broadcasting had to pay $2 million in damages, and the head of Cartoon Network eventually resigned. Mid-January, the sky decided to join the recap. Comet McNaught, the great comet of 2007, flared so bright it was visible in broad daylight. People stood outside, squinting up at a prehistoric lump of space rock. Then they went back inside, booted their computers, and carried on building the modern world. A comet overhead, a touchscreen in your pocket, a terror scare caused by a pixelated alien. The opening act of 2007 had a bit of everything. February. February was a month in which the media's obsession with celebrity reared its ugly head in a major way. First, on the 8th, the model Anna Nicole Smith was found dead in a hotel room, which sparked a media circus that was frenzied even by 2007 standards. On the 16th, paparazzi followed Britney Spears to a hair salon in Tarzana, California. The flashes intensified as she reached for a razor and shaved her head. It became the defining image of the world's obsession with celebrity destruction, particularly in the US. At the time, it was treated as a joke on late-night TV. Looking back, it was perhaps a cry for help. Leave Britney Alone wouldn't go viral until September, but February is when we really should have started listening. Still in the US, on the 10th, a junior senator stood outside the old state capitol building in Springfield, not that one, and announced his candidacy for president. His name was Barack Obama, and he was seen as a real longshot. Pundits smiled indulgently, called him articulate, and said he'd make a great vice president one day. On the 25th of February, the Academy Awards took place, and an unlikely movie star took home the gold. Former Vice President Al Gore won the Oscar for Best Documentary for An Inconvenient Truth. It put climate change on the mainstream map and convinced millions of us to switch to energy-efficient light bulbs, in a move that, thankfully, completely solved the climate crisis forever. Finally, on the 27th of February, the global financial markets had a little wibble. The Chinese stock market crashed by 9%, creating a shockwave that wiped 416 points off the Dow Jones in a single day. Economists called it a correction. Investors called it a glitch. Historians called it the warning shot. Ooh, foreshadowing. March. Things got a bit awkward in March. On the 23rd, 15 British sailors and Marines found themselves in difficult waters, literally and metaphorically, when they were seized at gunpoint by Iranian forces in the Persian Gulf, who claimed that they had strayed into Iranian water. If you're expecting a Tom Clancy-style thriller here, you're going to be disappointed. The captives were paraded on Iranian television, forced to apologize, and then, in a twist that confused everyone, were given ill-fitting new suits and let go. They were even given gift bags containing CDs and pistachio nuts as a parting souvenir. It was the first sign that modern geopolitical conflicts were very much going to be played out for the cameras. Over in Jamaica, the Cricket World Cup came under the global spotlight when Pakistan's coach Bob Woolmer was found dead in his hotel room, just hours after his team's shock defeat to Ireland. Initially, police announced it was a murder by strangulation. The world's press went into overdrive. Was it match fixers, a gambling syndicate, a poisoned champagne bottle? Eventually, though, Scotland Yard pathologists concluded he had died of natural causes, and the Jamaican police had to awkwardly retract the murder claim. Meanwhile, a war was declared in the corporate world. On the 13th of March, media giant Viacom sued Google and YouTube for $1 billion. Viacom claimed YouTube was a hub of massive intentional copyright infringement. It was the moment old media, TV networks, finally realized that new media, cat videos, was eating their lunch and tried to sue it out of existence. Spoiler, they didn't succeed. In movie news, it was a great month for slow-motion shots of washboard abs as Zack Snyder's 300 was released. It retold the Battle of Thermopylae with a lot of shouting and very little clothing. It gave us the line, "This is Sparta!" which was, arguably, the first verbal meme to cross over from the medium of the internet to the medium of inebriated people shouting it in pubs. April 2007 will largely be remembered for the Virginia Tech shooting. A student killed 32 people and wounded 17 others in 2 separate attacks on campus, before taking his own life. It remains the deadliest mass shooting on a US campus. The tragedy sparked immediate, intense debates about gun control, mental health care, and campus security. The exact same debates that still take place today. In other news, we have a mystery that felt like the start of a science fiction movie. Beekeepers across the Northern Hemisphere reported that their bees were simply vanishing. It was called colony collapse disorder. Worker bees were abandoning the hive and never coming back, leaving behind the queen to starve. Theories ranged from pesticides and mites to mobile phone signals. Years later, scientists concluded it wasn't aliens or cell phones, but a combination of parasites, pesticides, and stress. Basically, they were working too hard and eating junk food. Relatable content. Over in Russia, an era officially ended. Boris Yeltsin, the first president of the Russian Federation, died of heart failure. Yeltsin was a complex figure. a man who bravely climbed onto a tank to stop a coup in 1991, but who also spent much of the late 90s publicly drunk and dancing at diplomatic events. His death marked the final closing of the chaotic Wild West chapter of post-Soviet Russia and the opening of the era of his successor, Vladimir Putin. Also in April, the world lost one of its sharpest minds. Kurt Vonnegut, the author of Slaughterhouse-5, died at age 84. He was a man who saw the world as a tragic, hilarious mess and spent his life trying to explain it to us. As he famously wrote whenever death occurred in his books, so it goes. May. Before I cover the first story of May, I have a question. Do you know what a hospital pass is in football, aka soccer? It's when one teammate passes to another in a way that leaves the receiver open to an immediate, brutal tackle. Well, in May 2007, the UK saw this on a political scale when Tony Blair announced he would be stepping down as Prime Minister to be replaced by his Chancellor Gordon Brown, just months before the start of a huge global financial crisis. It was particularly rough given that Brown had been waiting years to step up, having staunchly supported Blair for over a decade, from their early days of things can only get better, all the way through the latter days of things are actually quite complicated, especially in the Middle East, oh dear. But the biggest news story of the month, and perhaps the decade, began on the 3rd of May in Praia da Luz, Portugal. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from her bed while her parents were dining nearby. It launched a global manhunt and a media frenzy that has arguably never really ended. The case became a grim fixture of 2007 and beyond. Elsewhere in May, Nicolas Sarkozy won the presidential election in France, Paris Hilton was sentenced to 45 days in prison for violating her probation, cue another famous mugshot, and Spider-Man 3 and 28 days later were both released. But more important than all of that, on the 22nd of May, a 56-second clip called Charlie Bit My Finger hit YouTube. It was not news, it was not art, it was a toddler biting his brother's finger. It went on to become one of the biggest viral videos on the planet, and it taught us a new truth. The internet was not only for information, it was also for watching other people's kids do mild violence. June. After 6 months of build-up, the iPhone was finally released on the 29th of June. 270,000 were sold in the first 30 hours. It took just 74 days for sales to hit 1 million. For comparison, it took 2 years to sell the first million iPods. This was less a product launch and more a religious event. People camped on sidewalks for days to be the first to get their hands on one. But, a moment of silence for these early adopters, Apple dropped the price by $200 just 2 months later. Steve Jobs eventually had to offer them a $100 store credit just to stop them from rioting. Meanwhile, in the UK, the organisers of the London 2012 Olympics released their new logo, which had cost £400,000 to design. The reaction was immediate, and not positive. Critics said it looked like a broken swastika or a monkey playing a saxophone. Some even suggested that it resembled Bart and Lisa Simpson doing something rather unsavoury. And worse yet, an epilepsy warning had to be issued for an animated promotional video featuring the logo. It remains a £400,000 reminder that sometimes you should just hire a graphic design student for 50 quid. It was a busy old month in the UK. Away from questionable logos, Tony Blair handed over the reins to Gordon Brown. The country saw widespread flooding due to heavy rain. For those watching from outside the UK, this is extremely unusual. It never rains here normally. And 2 terrorist attacks were thwarted in the space of 2 days. First in London, where 2 car bombs were found and defused, then in Glasgow. Let's talk about the latter. 2 bad guys drove a burning jeep loaded with propane canisters into the doors of Glasgow Airport. They expected panic and terror. What they got was John Smeaton. Smeaton was a baggage handler on his cigarette break. Instead of running away, he shouted, "F*** on then!" Scottish to English translation, "I say, you there, let's see what you're made of," and ran towards the burning vehicle. He, along with a very angry taxi driver and a few passers-by, proceeded to beat the living daylights out of the attackers. The taxi driver, Alex McIlveen, famously kicked one of the terrorists, who, by the way, was already on fire, so hard in the groin that he tore a tendon in his own foot. Smeaton later told reporters, "This is Glasgow, we'll set about you." Translation, "In this fine city of Glasgow, if you attempt anything untoward, be prepared for a jolly good contretemps." July. On the 1st of July, the social fabric of the United Kingdom changed forever. England officially banned smoking in all enclosed public spaces. Overnight, the Great British Pub was transformed. Without the thick protective fog of cigarette smoke, punters suddenly realised that their local pub actually smelled of stale ale, bleach, and damp dog. The ban also created a new social phenomenon: smirting. That's smoking plus flirting. If you wanted a cigarette, you had to stand outside in the rain, huddling with strangers for warmth. In an era before the existence of Tinder, this is how most British people found love. On the 7th of July, 070707, the world came together for Live Earth. Organised by Al Gore, it was a massive global concert across 7 continents to raise awareness for climate change. Did it solve the climate crisis? Well, no. But for one day, 2 billion people watched the Police, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Madonna try their best. It was a moment of genuine global optimism, even if a few critics did point out the slight irony of flying 150 rock stars around the world on private jets to sing about carbon footprints. On the 21st of July, the world collectively stopped reading the news and started reading a book. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows was released. It was the literary event of the decade. Scholastic printed 12 million copies before anyone had even turned page 1. To prevent leaks, finished copies were guarded with security usually reserved for nuclear launch codes. It sold 11 million copies in the first 24 hours. Then, on the 31st of July, 2 hedge funds managed by Bear Stearns filed for bankruptcy protection. They had bet heavily on something called subprime mortgages. At the time, it was a boring headline on page 14 of the financial papers. Most people ignored it to go watch the Simpsons movie or the premiere of Mad Men. We really should have been paying more attention. August. August kicked off with a story that sounded less like international diplomacy and more like the plot of a Pierce Brosnan-era Bond movie. On the 2nd of August, 2 Russian mini-submarines descended over 4 kilometers to the bottom of the Arctic Ocean, directly under the North Pole. Their mission? To plant a rust-proof titanium Russian flag on the seabed. Explorer Artur Chelingarov popped up and effectively declared that Russia now had dibs on the Arctic. It was a bold, if slightly bizarre attempt to claim the region's massive oil and gas reserves. The rest of the world just rolled its eyes, with Canada's foreign minister pointing out, "This isn't the 15th century, eh? You can't just go around the world and plant flags, eh?" Meanwhile, in America, on the 1st of August, the I-35 West Mississippi River Bridge in Minneapolis collapsed during rush hour, sending dozens of cars into the water and killing 13 people. It was a tragic, sudden wake-up call about America's crumbling infrastructure. Now, tenuous segue. Speaking of crumbling infrastructure, on the 9th of August, French bank BNP Paribas froze 3 of its investment funds, admitting they had no way to value the assets inside them because the market for subprime mortgages had evaporated. If you're looking for the exact moment the global financial crisis began, this is a strong contender. Central banks scrambled to pump billions of dollars into the system to keep it moving. It was the financial equivalent of hearing a strange clanking noise in your car engine and turning up the radio to drown it out. Finally, on the 23rd of August, a web designer named Chris Messina sent a tweet that changed how we speak. He suggested using the pound symbol, that's this one, aka the hash symbol, to group conversations. At the time, Twitter's founders thought it was too nerdy and would never catch on. They were wrong. The hashtag was born. It eventually would go from a niche tech idea to a weapon that topples governments, ruins careers, and allows influencers to aggressively tag their avocado toast with #blessed. September. If August was the sound of a strange clanking noise in the engine, September was the bonnet popping open in a cloud of steam. On the 14th of September, the UK saw its first run on a bank since 1866, literally just as Gordon Brown had finished unpacking at 10 Downing Street. Northern Rock, a major mortgage lender, asked the Bank of England for emergency financial support. The government urged everyone not to panic. Everyone immediately panicked. Thousands of customers formed queues outside branches across the country to withdraw their life savings. The phrase credit crunch became known to the public, but it was a couple of weeks before they came to realize that this was not, in fact, a delicious new breakfast cereal. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, a fuel price hike sparked the Saffron Revolution. Thousands of Buddhist monks took to the streets in peaceful protest, facing down a brutal military junta with nothing but prayer bowls. And in Syria, Israeli jets bombed a mysterious facility in Operation Orchard, destroying a secret nuclear reactor. The Middle East was a powder keg, surrounded by people holding matches. In the US, a modern mystery unfolded. On the 3rd of September, record-breaking aviator Steve Fossett took off for a solo flight over the Nevada desert and simply vanished. Despite a massive search using Google Earth crowdsourcing, he wasn't found until a hiker stumbled upon his ID cards a year later. Finally, we distracted ourselves. Halo 3 launched, making more money in 24 hours than most movies, and The Big Bang Theory premiered, starting the 12-year reign of the phrase bazinga, for which the writers have not yet faced trial. After a disastrous VMA performance by Britney Spears, a blogger named Chris Crocker screamed, "Leave Britney alone!" from under a bedsheet. We laughed at him then, but looking back at the wreckage of 2007, he was probably the only one making sense. October 2007 will mainly be remembered for another reminder of how helpless we can be against nature. Starting on the 20th of October, a series of massive wildfires spread across the southern part of California, destroying more than 900,000 acres and more than 3,000 homes. The images were terrifying. Mansions in Malibu burning next to trailer parks, forcing the largest evacuation in California's history. Meanwhile, the music industry was continuing its identity crisis. On the one hand, you had Radiohead releasing In Rainbows online and letting fans pay whatever they wanted for it, including nothing. A revolutionary experiment that treated fans like adults. On the other hand, you had the Recording Industry Association of America. On the 4th of October, a jury ordered a single mother named Jamie Thomas Rassett to pay $222,000 for sharing 24 songs on Kazaa. It became one of the first major file-sharing cases to reach a jury. The industry wanted to make an example of her. Instead, they made a martyr. The case would drag on for years, with the fine racking up to almost $2 million, before ending with her bankruptcy and the public firmly deciding that suing single mums probably wasn't a sustainable business model. In Pakistan, politics was becoming more and more dangerous. On the 18th of October, former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto returned from 8 years of exile. Millions flooded the streets of Karachi to welcome her, but the homecoming turned into a massacre. 2 bombers struck her motorcade, killing over 130 people. She survived the attack, but it was a horrific foreshadowing of what was waiting for her and Pakistan at the end of the year. November began with a grim discovery in Perugia, Italy, that would turn into a decade-long media obsession. On the 2nd of November, the body of British student Meredith Kercher was found. Almost immediately, the investigation focused on her American flatmate, Amanda Knox. The tabloids went into a frenzy, dubbing her Foxy Knoxy, and treating a brutal murder investigation like a reality TV show. It became a disturbing case study in how the 24-hour news cycle could consume a tragedy. The legal battle lasted 8 years. Knox was convicted, acquitted, convicted again, and finally acquitted for good by Italy's Supreme Court in 2015. A long, messy legal saga that turned a murder case into global entertainment. Then nature delivered another devastating blow, this time to Bangladesh. On the 15th of November, Cyclone Sidr struck the southwest coast. Packing winds of 360 kilometers or 160 miles per hour, it was one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the region. It killed thousands and left millions homeless. Unlike the California wildfires the month before, which dominated news because they threatened palatial mansions, This catastrophe unfolded largely off-camera in the West. The media was busy, with Hollywood, where the Writers Guild of America went on strike. 12,000 writers put down their pencils to demand a cut of new media revenue. Studios treated online video as a side project at the time. The strike lasted 100 days, forcing late-night hosts to improvise and cutting seasons short for shows like Lost and Breaking Bad. It was the first time the industry truly fought over the digital future. On the 19th of November, Amazon released the Kindle. It cost $399, had a weird angled keyboard and a screen that flashed black every time you turned a page. Critics laughed at the design, but customers bought it anyway. It sold out in 5.5 hours. Books had officially gone digital. Finally, on the 21st of November, English football suffered its most embarrassing night in a generation. Needing only a draw against Croatia to qualify for Euro 2008, England lost 3-2 at Wembley. But the enduring image wasn't the score. It was the manager, Steve McLaren, standing on the sideline holding a large umbrella to protect his hair, while his team crumbled. The press dubbed him the Wally with the Brolly. It was a quintessential British sporting disaster. Damp, disappointing, and as much focused on the weather as the score. December. December began with the reappearance of a ghost. On the 1st of December, a man walked into a London police station and said, "I think I might be a missing person." It was John Darwin. 5 years earlier, he had vanished while canoeing in the North Sea. His wife Anne had grieved, claimed a fortune in life insurance, and planned a move to Panama in his absence. For a few days, John's return was a miracle. Then someone found a photo of the pair online via a simple Google search. It showed John and Anne smiling happily in Panama, dated last year. There was a crime afoot, and it was a really, really stupid one. I made a whole video on it if you want to know more. On the 10th of December, rock and roll history was made at the O2 Arena in London. Led Zeppelin reunited for their first full concert in 27 years. The demand was hysterical. Over 20 million people applied for the 18,000 tickets. It remains the highest demand for a single concert in history. For 2 hours, 3 men in their 60s, plus Jason Bonham, proved they were still the gods of thunder. And then, true to form, they walked away and never played together again. In the US, 2 reports landed that shattered reputations. First, on the 13th of December, the Mitchell Report was released. It named 89 Major League Baseball players, including legends like Roger Clemens, who were alleged to have used steroids. It was the moment baseball finally had to admit its golden era was built on the back of a syringe. Then, the CIA admitted it had destroyed 92 videotapes of interrogations of Al-Qaeda suspects. They claimed it was to protect the identity of agents. Critics suggested it was actually to protect the agents from war crimes tribunals. Finally, the year ended in tragedy. On the 27th of December, Benazir Bhutto was assassinated. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan had returned from exile just weeks earlier, hoping to restore democracy. She was leaving a rally in Rawalpindi when a gunman opened fire and a bomber detonated a vest. Her death threw Pakistan into chaos and sent shockwaves around the world. So, that's 2007. A game changer of a year. Brutal in some ways and brilliant in others. And if you squint, you can just about see the world of today beginning to take shape.